Folklore, fiction, and tabletop RPGs often feature spellcasters that cast their spells by etching runes, symbols, or sigils, and infusing them with magical powers. Even if you read GURPS mythology, you will find an interesting symbol magic system. I wish it got more attention in other books. If you look at D&D, you will be able to find many similar concepts: arcane rune casters, divine rune priests, and even aboleths that carve psionic glyphs. Back in the day, I converted the GURPS symbol magic to magic as powers to represent such spellcasting traditions, but that conversion was unwieldy and overcomplicated. It was tested out in one game, and the test showed that while functional, that system had many problems. It seemed that it relied on hardcore improvisation too much, making the actual sorcerer's empowerment advantage something of a point fee instead of a useful advantage. It also had way too many roles, and I say that as a person that likes additional roles. So I decided to rework it a bit into something more simple and streamlined, and in this video I'd like to show you the result. Runes are spells that are inscribed on a surface or carved into it. It takes no less than 10 minutes to inscribe a rune, and appropriate tools: ink pen, charcoal, quill, chisel and hammer, etc. The runecaster must also make a successful symbol drawing roll with a specialty that corresponds to his spellcasting tradition. Doubling the time required gives +1, while halving it gives -2. Some runes take longer to inscribe, and work on some very complex runic spells might take more than a day. If the caster is significantly interrupted, surprised, attacked, etc. during the inscribing, all his work is lost and the entire process must begin all over again. While inscribing runes that take more than a single day, the caster is allowed to eat and sleep normally, but any major diversion from his work, such as training, rushing off to adventure, defending his home against attack, is considered an interruption. The symbol drawing roll also takes a -2 penalty for each other active rune inscribed by the caster, plus -1 per failed attempt at inscribing this rune. The latter penalty lasts until a full day has passed without inscribing that rune. A rune must have a set of conditions that trigger its activation. It can be anything from being seen, touched, read, stepped on, concentrated on, a command word, and the condition is set by the rune caster when he is inscribing the rune. Thus, two identical runes may have different triggering conditions. Valid subjects include 1. The creature that triggered the rune, for example, if a halfling thief touches a runic lock with his lockpicks, causing the rune to deal burning damage to him. 2. The object or surface upon which the rune is inscribed, for example, a rune of fire inscribed on a weapon sheathes the weapon in fire when triggered with a command word. 3. The wearer or wielder of the object upon which the rune is inscribed. For example, a rune of healing inscribed on a breastplate heals the wearer when he receives injury. 4. The creature or object that was struck by the object upon which the rune is inscribed. For example, a rune of pain inscribed on a weapon afflicts anyone struck with it with terrible pain. And 5. Area around the rune. For example, a rune that creates an explosion when triggered. Thus, you cannot inscribe a rune on a wand that is activated by the wielder to cause affliction in a distant target. Once a rune has taken effect, it does not disappear. Once its effects are exhausted, however, the rune becomes an ordinary carving or inscription with no magical capabilities whatsoever. To renew the rune's power, the caster must inscribe it all over again. Unless otherwise specified, assume that all runes may be used one time only, so the rune may stand ready in an activated state for years before its power is called upon. Obviously, a runecaster cannot inscribe a rune he does not know, and learning a new rune is much more difficult than simply memorizing its pattern. Rune magic does not work without a deep understanding of the essential truths and relationships that the pattern of the rune represents. Thus, runecasters cannot use using abilities at default, but they learn their rune spells as alternative abilities. A given game world might have multiple runecasting traditions. it is suggested to define scope limitations for them, so they will encompass no more than 4 colleges of magic each. Regardless of scope, it is thematically appropriate to allow the runecaster to take the rune enchantment spell that I will show off later. So, how do we build the actual rune spells? That's not a straightforward matter, so let's discuss it in more detail. A rune spell must have a power modifier. By default this is magical, but if for example a particular rune casting tradition depends on invoking divine runes created by deities, like rune magic of D&D 3.5 and before, where runecasters are divine spellcasters, then you might want to replace it with divine. And as I said before, in D&D, aboleths could create psionic glyphs, so even psionic power modifier would make sense. A rune spell must have a casting time. This represents the amount of time required to inscribe the rune. The exact time may vary, but it should not be shorter than 10 minutes. Since multiple instances of the same rune may be inscribed, use preparation required per use. That's a limitation from Pyramid 3.105. To do that, take the value for preparation required and halve it. Even though runic spells require preparation, they do not become inert when another instance is prepared. Apply Cosmic does not become inert, plus 100%. That's another enhancement for Pyramid 3.105. Effectively, they are permanent, but can be dispelled with Dispel Magic or other appropriate abilities for other power modifiers, destroyed physically, or be erased with mundane or supernatural means. Rune spells have variable activation conditions. This applies Delay Supernatural Trigger plus 100%. That's an enhancement from GURPS powers. Even though you can specify a triggering condition, the maximum range at which the triggering can happen depends on your symbol drawing roll made to inscribe the rune. If your roll is successful, look up the margin of success in the size column of the size and speed range table. The corresponding linear measurement is the maximum radius of the area. You may always choose a smaller area. If the underlying advantage has a shorter maximum range, then use the maximum range of the advantage instead. This is borrowed from the Delayed Message spell from GURPS Thaumatology Sorcery. Rune spells are subject to penalties for repeated attempts that are harsher than those described in GURPS powers. This applies nuisance effect, repeated attempts minus 5%. A rune requires a successful symbol drawing roll to inscribe. This applies require symbol drawing roll minus 10% to all runic spells. A rune requires some tools to inscribe. This applies trigger, writing implements minus 10%. A rune can only be inscribed on a firm surface. You cannot hang a rune in the air, inscribe it on water, etc. This applies environmental surface minus 5%. And you cannot inscribe a rune at a distance. This applies melee attack, reach C, cannot parry minus 35%. If we combine all the following modifiers, using magical minus 10% and preparation required per use 10 minutes minus 15% as a default, we get runic magic plus 110% as a meta enhancement or power modifier. Also, spells that are resisted with a quick contest or that require an innate attack roll should be shifted to symbol drawing by applying based on symbol drawing own roll plus 20% when required. And here are some sample rune spells that I made up. I intentionally created very different ones to show off the possibilities. We have Explosive Runes, that's a classic D&D spell. An Icy Rune that applies a follow-up to an attack, but only once. Rune Enchantment that allows enchanting objects with any spells basically that you want, because runic enchantment is a staple of the fantasy genre. Rune of Combat that gives the subject a buff. Rune of Fireball that launches a fireball. Rune of Healing that heals you or the other subject, and Symbol of Pain that causes pain. So when using this system, you do not really have any Sorcerer's Empowerment or a similar base advantage. You just take several rune spells as alternative abilities, So you will have only a few spells, but I think that it's interesting. I like the result. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.